Once upon a time, and not so very long ago, a child decided to look outside a world to get to know. And as the child looked, she decided to set out to see just what this world was really like and what a child should be. She wandered through green valleys and climbed mountains majestically high. She met people and animals and other living things. Still, she wondered, who am I? And so she began to question all the living things she could see, trying to find an answer to what a me should be. Finally, a tall green pine, an old and stately tree, whispered through the breeze, "Look for a door with a pearl handle key. And when you find the door and turn the pearl handle key, you'll find the answer you're searching for, just what a me should be." But wherever should I search? In which direction should I look? Just listen to all the living things and look in every brook. Take time to get to know the world you're so quickly traveling through. It will help you find the door that tells you how you are you. And so she set out again, a clearly focused purpose in her mind. There was a door with a pearl handle key that she was determined now to find. But as she started her journey, she was extremely surprised to see many kinds of doors and every conceivable kind of key. I don't have time to stop and look at every single door. A pearl handle key it's got to be before I take time to explore. But as time quickly passed, she didn't seem to be getting anywhere. But as time quickly passed, she didn't seem to be getting anywhere. Maybe I'll open one of these doors just to see what's in there. And so she turned a golden key in a door of dark, beautiful wood. And on the other side, a small town by a blue lake stood. She slowly wandered down a hill and was warmly welcomed into the town. And as she spent time there, a sense of peace is what she found. Then sitting by the lake one day with a friend she'd gotten to know, across the lake appeared a door, and she knew it was time to go. And so her journey went as time unheeded passed in years. She spent long times and short times leaving when a door would appear. And somewhere along the way, the door with the pearl handle key became less important than learning and growing and seeing the life behind each new door she opened. And one day in the twilight, after opening a door of old stately pine, she found before her a mountain, and slowly she began to climb. Halfway up the mountain, she heard a gurgling brook, and leaving the well-worn path, she decided to take a look, for she'd found it was the uncommon things quite often from which she learned the most about the world, so from a path she often turned. She quickly found the brook, and as she bent down to see, she saw a reflection from across the way, a door and a pearl handle key. She sat down by the brook in reflection of the door. The door with the pearl handle key just wasn't so important anymore, yet wasn't that her purpose in setting out to see just what this world was really like and what a me should be? So slowly and sadly she stood to cross the gently gurgling brook. She'd opened every other door. Behind this one too she would look, but as she got to the other side, expecting to find the pearl handle key and door, it was no longer there, and the reflection showed it clearly on the other shore. So again she crossed the brook, and again it was no longer there. The reflection was in the water, but the door wasn't anywhere. So she sat down by the brook in reflection of the door and key, and suddenly she thought, when I look in the water, what do I really see? So she bent down very closely, and within the door with the pearl handle key, she noticed a unique reflection. It was herself that she could see. Well, that seems very strange, she thought, that inside the door I should appear. And suddenly she realized the answer was sparklingly clear. The answer of the door with the pearl handle key is that a reflection of herself is what she'd learned to see. With each new door she opened, invariably she would find new truths and awarenesses about herself that had been there all the time. She sat by the brook a while longer, then with a gentle smile she slowly stood. It was time she was moving on, and she made her way back through the woods. She knew her journey was far from over. Other doors would always appear in the time and space when she would be ready, their lessons to clearly hear. And as the twilight deepened, she smiled gently, thinking of an old stately pine, and picking up her well-worn walking stick again, she began to climb. I wrote that poem when I was a second-year seminary student. I'd gone to seminary from being a junior high English and reading teacher and volleyball, basketball coach, and cheerleader sponsor. People have all kinds of stories about their calls to ministry. I just say junior high cheerleaders sent me into the ministry. Understand, I did not go into seminary to be a pulpit pastor. I went into seminary because there was a famine in Ethiopia. And I thought, I'm from western Kansas. I'm of sturdy stock. I grew up on a dryland wheat farm and really never knew anything but work, and we never had much. And I thought, I'm able-bodied. I'm not married. I'm just going to fly to Africa and carry bags of grain. Well, I happened to call an old stately pine in my life who happened to be a United Methodist pastor. And I said, I'm wanting to get to Ethiopia and Africa, and I thought you might be able to help me. And and he said, well, Nanette, maybe you ought to connect with the church. And I said, no, church is boring. I stopped going to church when I was fully immersed at the Church of the Brethren when I was in 6th grade. Well, I didn't completely stop. My parents did. When I was a freshman and I got my driver's permit, I began to drive into the county seat town, Norton, and I was intrigued by the preaching pastor there in the Christian church. And so I was the only 16-year-old that was driving herself to church every Sunday while my parents, who I love dearly, were staying home. My mom has told me that they worried about that and they thought about getting me counseling. My sister had a poster of the Osmond brothers on her bedroom door, and I had a poster of Billy Graham on my door. Yeah, just imagine that, a 15-year-old with Billy Graham on her door. But I didn't go to seminary to be a preaching pastor because I'd never seen any women pastors. I went to seminary because this old stately pine in my life said, you could connect with the church. It would be a lot easier. And the United Methodist Church is a great place to start. And the kinds of questions you're asking about why you have enough and other people in the world don't are the kinds of questions they ask in seminary. So I went to visit St. Paul. And they plopped me down in a class with text sample. And I sat in rapt attention for 50 minutes, which is a long time for me. I have a little bit of ADHD, whether you can tell that or not. But I sat in rapt attention and so intrigued that when I got back to Medicine Lodge, Kansas, home of Carrie Nation, by the way, when I got back to Medicine Lodge, Kansas, I typed up my letter of resignation to be effective at the end of the school year. And then I went home to tell my parents. My dad said, Nanette, what are you going to do for a living? I said, I'm going to rely on God's people. And he said, Nanette, your mom and I are God's people. We're not going to support you for the rest of your life. He said, you're going to go get a master's degree. And they had supported me. I had a lot of scholarships, but they had supported me through my undergraduate education. Dad said, Nanette, we're not supporting you. I said, I don't need your support. Well, maybe I did, but I was going to be a missionary, but I needed a job. And so I fell into a job at a large church that needed a youth director. And the funny thing was that the senior pastor at that large church that needed a youth director was named Ken Luchin, who later became the head of UMCOR. I didn't know him from Adam, and I didn't care. But he hired me. And he was always gone somewhere, even when he was in the local church. And so one year he went to India, and I was a second-year seminary student, and he called me. An old stately pine called me and said, Nanette, I'm not going to get back by Sunday. You're going to have to preach. And I said, no, the district superintendent can preach. He goes, no, the book of discipline says, by the way, I hadn't had that class yet. The book of discipline says that if the senior pastor is gone and there is an associate, she preaches. I'm from a small town in western Kansas. And about as naive as they came at that point, he said, you have to preach. And I thought, oh, Lord Jesus. So I started writing a sermon on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. And on Sunday morning, when I got up into the pulpit to preach, guess who was sitting in the back pew? I've never been so angry in my life. And I thought, well, God, I'm a little overwhelmed. It's up to you. And I tell this story to students that I see a call to ministry in from my perspective. I stepped in that pulpit, and before I opened my mouth, I knew I was home. I just knew I was home. That first sermon was actually one of my better ones, and my congregations will attest to that because it only lasted 12 minutes. I've gotten longer since then. When we're considering what it means to provide an environment for clergy to come into ministry and find their excellence and find their way towards perfection in love of God and neighbor and holiness of heart and life, we need to be old stately pines. She knew her journey was far from over. Other doors would always appear, in the time and space when she would be ready, their lessons to clearly hear. And as the twilight deepened, she smiled gently, thinking of an old, stately pine, and picking up her well-worn walking stick again, she began to climb.